Hi, welcome to our presentation. This is Let's Talk Tech. Today we're going to go over three tech tools or three tech platforms that we find very useful in our world language classrooms. We're going to focus on Padlet, Screencastify, and Flipgrid. But first we're going to introduce ourselves. Hi, my name is Hannah Gallagher. I am the 7th grade Spanish teacher at Lawton C. Johnson Summit Middle School. This past year was my 4th year teaching.
My name is Melissa Saracino. I teach alongside Hannah, and I've been teaching for 17 years, mostly 8th grade Spanish 2 classes.
And I'm in 7th grade Spanish 1. Okay, so we're going to start with Padlet. Padlet is a great tool. It's basically like an online bulletin board. It's great because you can bring in other media links, as you can see in this picture here, links, images, text, files, GIFs. You can have your students snap selfies. It's a great way for students to brainstorm ideas, to comment on each other's work. It is great for building classroom community, and I'm going to show you how I do that in just a second. You can easily use this as an opening or a closing to a lesson. And overall, it's free, but it does have some limitations, the free version. So this is Padlet. This is my dashboard. I already have an account. It is compatible with Google, so if you have a Google account through your school, that is a huge plus. These are all of my Padlets that I've made. You would click Make a Padlet to make one, and you have all of these options for different Padlets that you can make. Wall and grid are pretty similar. They create posts that format like a grid or like a wall here. A stream is more like a social media, think like a feed. There's an option for a map where you can have your students link different media to different parts of a country. I've had my students do that before. It's really fun. There's a timeline, a back channel, the canvas where you can point different arrows, and then the shelf, which is where you can organize your Padlet by shelves. And I know this might seem a little bit overwhelming, but we're going to get into how we use some of these formats. So example 1, I do something every Monday with my students called Alto Bajo Maracuya. It's a reflection on their weeks, and alto is they share the high, the best thing that happened over their week. Bajo is the low of their week, what wasn't so great. And then the maracuya literally means passion fruit. It's something that they're looking forward to in the coming weeks or years, the coming day. It doesn't really matter, just something positive about the future. So students can insert an image or a GIF that's related to their posts. So here's my example. As you can see, I always start mine. So I give my example, and students will write their names in the titles, and then they write their alto, bajo, and maracuya. Some of my students included GIFs or photos that had to do with their post. This was done on, I think it was Gridview, if I'm not mistaken. As you can see in the upper right-hand corner here, this is just a screenshot. But you can easily remake a Padlet. So if you want to create a Padlet for one period, you can click the remake button and it'll just take everything you do. You have the ability to copy it with posts or without. There's also the ability to share. You can make it public on the web. I make mine private to protect student privacy. And this works really well for my students.
So I'm going to share example 2 that was used during virtual learning. I do a phrase of the week or frase de la semana each week. And during virtual learning this year, one of my phrases of the week was hashtag me quedo en casa, which means I stay home. And using Padlet, I had my students do an activity with this phrase of the week. During coronavirus and while we were at home virtually learning, I actually turned 40. So I reached out to my students for this activity and I asked them, how should I celebrate my birthday? At home. Mientras, or while I stayed home, me quedo en casa. So students, as you can see, as Hannah is scrolling through period 4, you can see some of their responses. We learned the command form, so they were telling me how I should celebrate my birthday. In addition to their responses, they added GIFs to go along with their wording. So I'm pretty sure I used shelf format here, and I like to organize it by class. So when I'm ready to grade, it's easy to grade because I have, you know, clase uno, class 1, and I have all my students and I can grade them easily on my roster when it's time to grade. So here's an example of how I use Padlet during virtual learning. And the really neat thing is that students can see not only their classmates' responses from their own class, but they're able to see their other classmates, which, you know, is not always feasible when they're in an actual classroom. So it's a great way to have students read and also practice their writing skills. So that's one example. And we're going to go to example number 3, another way that I used Padlet during virtual learning these past few weeks. So we did like a let's race activity. Now the activity I am going to show you was used during the food unit, but again, you can use it with whatever unit or grammar concept that you're teaching. So I was doing the food unit. Hannah's going to pretend to be one of my students, and this is called Let's Race. Before we actually race, or before I actually race with my students, I wanted to review the vocabulary. So as you can see in the first column, I have repaso con todos, right? It's a review with all my students to review the vocabulary before we actually race. All right, so Hannah's going to pretend to be one of my students. All right, so I'm going to give a clue about a vocabulary, and then all my students are going to race or race to write the answer. And this is just a review. Nobody is earning points. So I'm going to give an example in español, in Spanish. La usas para comer la sopa. La usas para comer la sopa. You use it to eat soup. And Hannah's one of my students today, and she wrote una cuchara, right? Una cuchara, a spoon. I'm going to give you another one. Lo usas para hacer guacamole. Lo usas para hacer guacamole. Okay? Un aguacate, an avocado, right? So I reviewed the vocabulary with my students for about 5 minutes, and then we do the race activity. So during virtual learning, I divided the class between chicas y chicos. But if you're in the classroom, you can do a race among tables or different groups. I just happen to organize it this way: chicas versus chicos, boys versus girls, or girls versus boys. Okay, so again, Hannah's going to pretend to be one of my students, and we're going to race, okay, for the right answer. And then if you see the last column, it says puntos, points. So whichever team earned the most points at the end won. Okay, so I'll give you 2 examples of how this worked. Okay, lo usas para cortar la carne. You use it to cut meat. Un cuchillo. So here, the girls, las chicas, would earn a point. I'm not able to actually do this right now, but when it's live, it's easy to do and you can earn the point. All right, we're gonna try it one more time. Es una bebida. It's a drink.
Batido.
Yeah. All right, so again, the chicas earn the point. So again, they would actually get a point in the puntos section. Okay, so this is a great way to get the kids competing with each other outside of the classroom during virtual learning, but again, you can do it in the classroom as well.
And as you can see here, there are so many things that you can add to your Padlet post. So you can upload something from your computer, you can add a website, you can add something from Google, you can have your students take a picture or take a video or record their voice, which is amazing in a world language classroom. You can record your screen, you can add a doodle. Here's where we add our GIFs or audio or videos or images. There are so many different things.
You can get very creative with Padlet.
Yeah, you can enter a URL. There's limitless possibilities. Next, we're going to talk about Screencastify. So Screencastify is a great resource that allows your students or yourself to record over the screen that you are showing, similar to what we're doing for this presentation. It is very user-friendly. It is an extension for your desktop, so it just goes onto your desktop, and let me show you what I mean by that. So you would just go to screencastify.com and you can install it. I have a Mac. My students all use Chromebooks at school, and it works great on both. So here's my extension. You can share your browser tab, your whole desktop, or just your webcam. So that would be just your face, like just using the camera. You can embed the webcam or not, and then you begin by just hitting record. Screencastify has its own editor, so it's easy to clip or cut clips. And it is free to a certain extent. We are currently on Screencastify Unlimited because Screencastify was a platform that allowed schools to take advantage of it during COVID, during virtual learning. But normally during the school year, I believe that it limits you to 10 minutes. Your video is like a max of 10 minutes. It might even be 5 minutes. So it's free with some limitations again. So the first example I'm going to show you is how I used Screencastify with Airbnb. So I did a project where my students explored Airbnb. They went to airbnb.es, which is in Airbnb in Spanish, and they explored different homes in Costa Rica. This went with my whole year. We talk about Costa Rica, the country, and then my unit was about homes. So they were able to explore different houses, different vacation rentals in Costa Rica, and then they created a Screencastify to answer 8 questions that I had outlined for them. So here is one of my students' examples.
Hola, me llamo Emma. El hogar está en ciudad que se llama Brasilito, en Guanacaste, Costa Rica. Es cerca de muchas playas, Conchal, Flamingo y Tamarindo. 2 huéspedes puede que quedar aquí. Este hogar tiene más o menos 3 cuartos y un dormitorio.
So she goes on to explain the pieces of furniture that are in each room. I got really good feedback from my students on this assignment. They really enjoyed exploring Airbnb in Spanish and then looking at different vacation rentals and then choosing whichever one they preferred to talk about in a screencast. It worked out really well.
So we're going to move on to example number 2. I use Screencastify so often during virtual learning. One of the ways I used it was to teach different grammatical concepts. So in this teacher example, I was teaching demonstratives. And after I taught the demonstratives, it actually led to an activity that I had my students do for the day. So what you're going to see here is me explaining the tail ends of the activity. As you can see, the video is a little longer, 2 minutes and 35 seconds. We're going to start towards the tail end. You're going to see me teaching or explaining the activity to the students using demonstratives, and then you'll see my teacher example.
Por esa, por esos o esas. Y el objeto o la persona a la derecha, vamos a imaginar que está súper lejos, entonces vamos a usar aquel o aquellos o aquellas. Les voy a dar un ejemplo. ¿Cuál profesor ha estado en Lawton C. Johnson Summit Middle School por más años? Esta profesora, si piensas que es señora Gallagher. Este profesor, si piensas que es señor Z, o aquella profesora, si piensas que soy yo. La respuesta correcta, escuchen. Ese profesor ha estado en Lawton C. Johnson por más años. That teacher has been in Lawton C. Johnson for the most years. And I'm talking about Mr. Z, and that's why I'm using ese. because it's masculine, en singular. Gracias por escuchar. Ahora vais a hacer la actividad.
So I gave an example. So Screencastify allowed me to record this Google slide, teach the concept, and then my students were given Google Slides with questions about my life, my husband, my cousin, my sister, and they had to answer questions using the demonstratives in the slide. So they had to record their answers via Screencastify, and then they shared them on Google Classroom. So you're going to see a student example of how this works.
Este vestido era su vestido de boda. Aquel hombre es su esposo. Usted nació en este país. Usted fue a esa universidad. Esta es su hermana. Ese es su hijo menor.
So students had to guess the answers, right, using demonstratives. And they made a copy of the Google Slides, used Screencastify to record their voices, and they also wrote on the Google slide their answers. And then not all the students had the answers that were correct, so the next day I shared the correct responses. So again, it was a great way for students to record their voices and practice their speaking skills.
Okay, so the last tool that we're going to talk about is Flipgrid. Flipgrid is an awesome way to promote classroom community, whether you're at school or stuck in virtual learning. I think one of the hardest parts for us teachers and for our students during virtual learning was that we were lacking that face-to-face connection and interaction. Flipgrid allowed that to happen because it's a platform that allows students and teachers to record videos and leave videos on a grid, okay, about a certain topic. It gives you the option to embed a rubric. You can leave it as basic feedback where you can write them a quick email that'll get sent to them, or you can customize it and make it your own rubric. It's awesome because, like I said, you can give students feedback on the spot, and there's the ability it allows you to embed outside media. So you can bring in different videos or photos and link it to your grid if it pertains to your topic. So if you went to flipgrid.com, this is what you would see. It says down here, educator sign up, it's free. That's if you don't have a Flipgrid account. You can enter a flip code, which pertains to one of our examples later, or you would go to educator login if you already have an account. So this is what my dashboard looks like. It tells you how much shared learning you have across your grid. So that's how much time your students were engaged for. I have 10 grids here. Here's an example of one of my grids, En Casa. So that was from one of my units. So think about the grid as the bigger picture, and then you can add topics within that. So En Casa was was the name of my grid, but then within that unit, I had my students do 2 different flip grids for the first part of the unit and for the second part of the unit, where they talked about chores they do around the house, and another one where they talked about a room that they described in their home. To create a flip grid, it's really easy, or to create a grid, it's super easy. You would just go to, sorry, our pictures are blocking it, but it's add new grid here. And I'm just going to type in sample grid. You can choose how you want your students to enter your grid. So whether they need to enter with their school email, if you have a one-to-one initiative and your students have email addresses, or their student ID, or if it's public, okay, and you can share it with educators in your network. So I always hit student ID. Flipgrid automatically knows that students in my network have an email address that ends with @summit.k12.nj.us. So anybody outside that domain cannot join the grid. This way it's private and protects my students' privacy. So it creates a link for you, and then you can hit go to my grid. So here I'm in my sample grid. I can add a new topic, and then, sorry, our faces are here in the way. Here's where you would add your title, and then you can have your students, you would write a description for your students. It gives you the opportunity to fix or like preset the recording time. And like I said, you can add different media here, and then you would just hit create topic. So we're going to show you how we used Flipgrid in our classrooms, both when we're at school and during virtual learning. So example number 1, I did a TikTok inspired Flipgrid with my students. I actually did an example for them. Let me see, I think we're good on time, so I can show it to you. So TikTok is really big for students right now. I teach middle school, so it's all the rage. So on TikTok, you can incorporate like different music, and there's different challenges. And something that I had seen was like when I do something versus when somebody else in my household does something. So here's my example.
Cuando yo arreglo la sala.
Okay, so it's just me tidying up. And then here we go.
Cuando mi novio arregla la sala.
I encourage students to bring family members in, to be silly with it. I had students dress up for this. So that was my example for my students. And so here's an example of one of the Flipgrids that one of my students submitted. I actually made this a competition between periods. I had them all submit to the same grid. And I had different categories where I gave out different prizes for. When my mom has to clean the kitchen.
Cuando mi hermana y yo tenemos que limpiar.
So this is actually something that was on Flipgrid, on TikTok, that my student brought onto Flipgrid for our TikTok inspired Flipgrid project. They came out super well. It was very entertaining to watch. So that's how I used Flipgrid during virtual learning in my classroom.
So we're going to end with example number 2 for Flipgrid. And I always have my 8th graders write letters to my 7th graders about Spanish 2, right? What they're going to be learning, what the class is like, what the teacher is like. And this year, during virtual learning, I had my 7th graders on Flipgrid ask my 8th graders 3 questions about Spanish 2, class with me, class with Mrs. Saraceno. So what you're going to see right now is an example of one of my 7th grade students asking a question or 3 questions about class in September with me, since they're going to have me again in the 8th grade.
Hola, mi preguntas son, ¿es la clase divertida o aburrida? ¿Qué es tu unidad favorita? Y hay mucha tarea en la clase.
And below are all the responses. So you're going to hear some responses from my current 8th graders.
Hola, clase es muy divertido. Mi unidad favorito es cocinar. También tiene un poco más tarea.
We're going to listen to one more response.
La clase es muy divertida. Mi unidad favorita es la unidad de comida y no hay mucha tarea.
So what you see, all those little circles with all those little images and some emojis are student responses, are my 8th graders responding to the 7th graders. So I actually told my 8th graders that they had to respond to 3 different 7th graders. So it was really neat to see how the 8th graders responded to their questions. Then I had my 7th graders go back to Flipgrid and listen to the responses from their 8th graders, or from the 8th graders in our building. So again, it's a great way for students to interact, okay? So if I want my 7th graders to respond, there is a possibility that they can respond as well. Okay, so it's another great way that you can use Flipgrid.
And if you don't teach multiple grade levels, you can have students between different classes ask questions and respond to each other that way as well. This would also be great if you were in contact with any schools. I know we have pen pals in Spain, and we actually recorded Flipgrids for our pen pals and vice versa. And it worked out really cool because it was a great way for the students to see each other's faces and really create that relationship or further that relationship. So we hope that you have enjoyed our presentation. If you have any questions, our email addresses are here. We both have accounts on Instagram that we try to keep up to date with different activities that we're doing in class. Mine is Español for the soul. The Enye actually doesn't go on Instagram, so it's just Español for the soul when you type it in, but that's my handle.
And mine is Profe de Spanish. So feel free to join us on Instagram or email us if you have any questions about what you heard and saw today.
We hope that you all have wonderful summers and a great school year next year. Thanks for joining us.
Adios. Ciao.